For me, I'm going to be really honest. D&D is my favorite game of all time. That being said, a close runner-up for me for tabletop games is definitely Magic the Gathering. It has been a game that I have played for a long time and has really captivated my interest in a lot of ways, and I absolutely adore the game. That being said, Wizards really hasn't touched every single plane that's in Magic. I know they went through Theros and Ravnica. That being said, there's lots of gaps. And so I personally find myself a lot of times kind of wondering how I can adapt some of these settings into my D&D games because they can be really interesting and a lot of fun. So I know that that's the same way for a lot of other D&D players. Today, I'm going to sit down and actually go through how I kind of change up my games to actually fit some of these planes into my games. So the very first thing I want to do is actually give you a little breakdown of kind of how this video is going to go. The first thing I want to talk about is I actually want to go through my process of turning MTG cards into actual D&D monsters or abilities, because I think it will add a lot of perspective on what I actually did to build in these Elder Dinos, which are my personal favorite cards from MTG, and I absolutely love them. They mean the world to me. They're from the plane that I actually started playing Magic on, so they're very special to me, and that's why I want to kind of share them with everybody. The second thing is I want to actually break down each individual dino and kind of talk about my process on why I chose the abilities that I chose for them before kind of giving out those stat blocks for other people to use in their games. So when I'm turning a Magic card into a D&D monster specifically, there are kind of three things that I start with. The first thing I do is I kind of look through the different stat blocks of monsters, and this works for abilities too. If there's a similar named ability or something that kind of has a similar effect to what you feel it would do in D&D, that's definitely a great starting point because Wizards has put a lot of time into balancing a lot of mechanics, and some of the more unbalanced ones we kind of know about and we kind of know how we personally would fix them anyways. So that's where I start, is I actually dig through and I see, well, what monster is probably closest to how this is going to feel, or if it's a specific type of like beast, maybe there's a beast stat block that I actually really like that I think is going to be fitting. It's a nice place to kind of have a beginning start place without having to really dig everything out of your own mind and have that like long process of building everything from a point buy all the way up to making a legendary monster or even a basic monster, and it can save you quite a bit of time, and I think it's really that useful first step. Then the second step for me is I go through what the Magic card does. So for a lot of abilities where it'll affect like card draw, I'm going to equate those to like spell slots or something in D&D that I feel like is going to be equivalent. If it's a big stompy monster, I'm going to look for big stompy abilities in Magic. I'm going to look for ways to make them feel like they are these big crushing things. Trample is one of those hard ones. Definitely a thing that I kind of give a lot of creatures with trample because I feel like it's very fitting is actually Rampage. I feel like Rampage is a nice equivalent, but you can kind of find your own thing and see what feels right for you. It takes a lot of getting used to actually be really good at this, and it has taken me years to kind of adopt what I like to grab for different monsters when I'm switching them over, or different abilities, because some of them can be really hard, because I wanted to make the spell opt into an actual ability in D&D, and that was really challenging. That card draw, I actually ended up equating to spell slots, and it was kind of fun and interesting. That being said, it wasn't super balanced, so that's one that I kind of try to stay away from. But there are other things that I have kind of tried to play with to grow into, and it definitely just takes time and practice. But I'm sure that you'll get it as long as you kind of take your time and really every time you run it, pay attention to what worked well and what didn't, and try to improve as you keep going. Kind of the third thing is really my backup. If there is an ability that I think there is absolutely no way to equate to a D&D, that's where I fall back on that flavor text. It's usually at the bottom of the card, and I think it's really, really crucial. And it's actually an amazing piece for you as a game designer because you can kind of, as a dungeon master, grab what things you think would fit the monster. It'll give you a little blurb about like the ability or the monster and how it really is supposed to feel and what it kind of does. And it's from the artist. I feel as though that this is probably one of the most fun ways to convert things over to D&D, even though it puts a lot more creativity on you. And personally, I kind of like that. It is how I did end up making one of the monsters in this video because there really wasn't much else to go on, so I kind of went off of the flavor text, and it made the encounter feel a little bit more fun for my players, and I actually personally liked it. With all that being said, I really want to get into the first monster here, and the first one I want to go over is Atali Primal Storm. This was probably one of the first monsters I ever had any idea of putting into D&D. I really love this card. It's a lot of fun, and the art is just so cool. And there's this lightning around him and Shroud, and it just looks like it could create an absolutely epic encounter. That being said, with the theme of him and what he does in Magic, he's one that kind of boggled me for a long time, and is actually what prompted me to make this video. I actually created a short on that a couple of weeks ago, and it got a lot of positive reviews, and a lot of people were really interested, and they commented and helped me kind of refine the idea of what I would do with this monster. And I think that that was really what kind of gave me the push I needed to make this a monster that then I ran in one of my games and people enjoyed. And so it's kind of led me to this point where I'm sitting here now talking about it. I really wanted to use this idea that he kind of steals cards from the top of your library to cast. And when I'm equating that to D&D, I have the idea of stealing spell slots and casting random spells from your, like your opponent's spell library. And that just sounds horrible to fight. If I'm being absolutely honest, it sounds horrific to fight. So I kind of struggled to balance him at first, and I was playing with it. Definitely one thing that I included in this build that I thought was just absolutely required was that he has to actually hit you in order to be able to do the damage and steal that spell slot. Really important small thing that made the whole encounter way more balanced. That being said, I sat here for hours building this stat block. And I sat for a long time behind my computer figuring out how to balance it. And what I ended up doing was kind of just refining in and tweaking and making a mythic action, which is something you don't really see from a lot of D&D monsters. I think there's like 6 in the monster manual that actually have mythic actions, and really kind of containing down that ability to steal spells because it could be really horrifying. But I feel as though it really did justice to the card itself to have that ability in there. The second Elder Dino I want to talk about is Tezamok. Tezamok is one of my favorite cards in D&D. When I was building my very first standard deck, he actually was a key component, and I know he wasn't great in standard. That being said, I love the theme of him. You pay 1 black, you reveal the card, and then when he enters the battlefield, everything you marked from revealing the card just blows up. It's kind of a lot of fun, and with the art of him throwing these vicious spikes at people, I thought he was just the coolest thing. And so I got really into him, and that's why I did build a deck around him. That being said, switching him into D&D could be a little challenging, especially since you can't just destroy players or destroy monsters by him entering the battlefield. That's kind of really hard to deal with. And especially with there being no like real world dinosaur that he kind of could be based off of. Whereas like Atali, I kind of grabbed the base stat block and tweaked it for a Spinosaurus. I was completely kind of flying by the seat of my pants with this one. So I ended up building his stat block completely custom, and I actually really liked how it turned out. With him, I kind of wanted to go with this rogue vibe where he was hiding in the shadows. It really fits a lot of what Black does. I know Black Blue does it a little bit better with like the spies and the rogues. That being said, I feel like with Death, Destruction, Spies, all of these hidden things as the color identity in Magic, I felt like making him almost a stealth monster was a lot of fun, so I took a lot of inspiration from the rogue class. That being said, I did give him a sneak attack, which I think is a really fun mechanic, and his legendary actions are to teleport away, hide, and also mark a player. And this mark can be devastating because whenever he lands a sneak attack, he gets to throw a barb at every single person who he's marked, and it applies this kind of bleed effect. Bleed in D&D isn't as scary as it is in like Elden Ring. That being said, it's still, if you miss the relatively low DC Constitution saving throw, it still does 2d6 to you, so it adds a little bit to the encounter, and if you're getting impaled, you're probably going to experience a little bit of bleeding, which is why I added it in there, and I think it definitely added some depth to it without making it too strong of an ability. That being said, I think that he still really could be just a nightmare to fight if you do him in certain settings where he can jump away, teleport, hide, and then mark another player every single round. Your players really need to find a way to get him out in the open, lock him down, and be able to just put in the damage to kill him. That being said, to kind of compensate for this, I made him a little bit squishier than some of these other monsters, just so that he's not quite as devastating to hit. Alright, so if you know anything about MTG and the Elder Dinos, I am sure you have seen this Elder Dino. I mean, at this point, he has 3 versions, and all of them are devastating. Every single one is this big, stompy, madly appearing dinosaur that is just so strong and can change the tide of a game, from making himself cheaper all the way up to just cheating in every monster and creature in your hand. He is absolutely insane, and that is why I love Gold. He adds these big, stompy kind of mechanics, and I was looking for a stat block for him, and I grabbed out the T-Rex, and I was like, this is a really cool stat block. But it doesn't match a 12/12 trampled dinosaur that can come in at any time and just wreck your board. So I was thinking, well, what other big stompy monsters are there in D&D that are truly devastating and kind of imposing? That led me right to the Tarrasque. I'm going to be perfectly honest, I grabbed a Tarrasque stat block as kind of the beginning of this journey because I felt like it was really fitting for Golta. He's one of the larger green creatures, if not one of the largest green creatures, and because of that, I feel like it's really fitting to kind of have him based off of the Tarrasque, because the Tarrasque has some holes in it. It's not the strongest monster in the game, and so grabbing it as the base stat block kind of let me twist it and create some fun things out of him. Now, when I was deciding what ability of these 3 gorgeous abilities that I had to work with, I ended up deciding I was going to completely chuck out the first card and move on with the second 2, and really kind of go with this vibe of him bringing in other creatures and growing a board state. And so what I ended up doing for him was I made it so that 3 times per day he can summon other T-Rexes, which feels really fitting for him, and bring in these other devastating monsters. That being said, with him being this strong, you do need to wait to use this monster for a much higher level party because of the fact that he's based on a Tarrasque, and then on top of that, he also brings in other T-Rexes, which are pretty strong as well. So I would use this monster kind of sparingly in your games and plan where he's going to be, because he really is a presence to behold, just like he is in Magic the Gathering. Zakama was probably the dinosaur I was the most reluctant to put in this video because he has so much text around him. I mean, he's got 3 abilities, plus he's a huge stompy monster, and he is just absolutely terrifying in every single way. So with him being big and terrifying, I kind of started with the same base stat block I did for Golta, kind of that empty Tarrasque one that I was ready to modify. That being said, this monster kind of got a little out of hand, as you'll see from the stat block. I definitely think with the abilities, he's a little stronger than he needs to be, so you could tune him down a little bit. I would say that he's kind of in a place where you might want to tune him down a little bit just because he is so strong. That being said, I'll kind of leave that up to the viewer to decide that. So I gave him kind of 3 abilities going off of what he does in Magic. The first ability is kind of that red burn ability. It's really strong, and because of that, I kind of started to base it off of Fireball. I mean, as a DM, how often do we get to hear about Fireball and somebody being like, I cast Fireball, and you just get to sit there and cry? Well, now it's kind of your turn to turn the tables. The second ability with destroying an artifact or enchantment, this is going to be a pretty unpopular one. I actually chose to go with Rust. I really like Rust mechanics, but they can be very unfun to play into because you lose your weapons, and that adds to the challenge, and it feels really thematic for destroying artifacts and enchantments, especially if you allow it to break magic items. That being said, this can be a great reason to give your party a brand new set of magic items, but at the time they may not be so happy with you. And that third and final ability, I kind of equated to something along the lines of a regeneration. I was going to do something where I gave him like a self-cure wounds or something of that sort where he had more of a role to heal. That being said, when I was kind of play testing it with some people that I know, it ended up being too strong and he was almost unkillable. I still gave him a lot of health, so you do have to DPS him down, and he is pretty strong for that. But it's a lot more fair than if I would have given him one of those like healing spells, which I felt was just really way too much in terms of healing. But feel free to modify that at your own merit. Zatalpa was by far my favorite one to make. That being said, pretty challenging because of the fact that his abilities don't really equate to anything in D&D. So what I had to go about and do is I actually started out with a very, very simple thing. I followed the flavor text route. I grabbed his flavor text talking about how the sky arises and the earth shakes, and I really leaned into that idea. I really went with the earth spells, making the ground shake, kind of controlling the earth around him, as well as being this huge Quetzalcoatl flyer that could really dish out some damage and had a ton of immunities from magic especially, so that he kind of feels like he does have indestructible in a way, and he is really protected from everything while still not killing everybody. That being said, to kind of keep his challenge rating a little bit lower and not just absolutely destroy the player base, what I decided to do is really crank down that health. He only has about 100 health. That being said, he has an ability on him that I thought was really fun for him, where if you deal magic damage to him, there is a way for him to actually absorb that as temporary hit points. And I thought that that was a lot of fun and very thematic for the monster. And especially if your party starts to figure it out and starts to use more melee weapons on him, he's going to melt pretty quickly. All right, and the last monster we have to talk about is Nezhal. I left him for last because this was by far the hardest monster for me to decide what to do with. He really has no abilities that kind of convert over to D&D at all. I mean, he gives you a maximum hand size, he lets you draw cards, and he kind of has some stuff to do with countering spells and controlling spells, which is really thematic for blue, but overall, he's really quite a hard monster to convert over to this D&D style. Because of that, I spent hours sitting behind my computer just even trying to figure out an idea for him. So what I ended up doing is kind of getting a little creative and going off of some more of Blue's well-known features that they do. With the hand size and the other draw effects, I really knew that I wanted to affect spell slots in some way and spells in some way and kind of make this a hard encounter for magic casters. And what I ended up settling on was kind of a counter spell method. Now, this is something that I really thought my players were going to dislike, but they had a lot of fun fighting it. He has an unlimited counter spell, and the thing that made this really rewarding for me was that mythic ability that I gave him, that when it's active for a whole hour every day, he gets to reflect back whatever spells he counters that are coming at him. And I thought that this was a lot of fun because he's basically setting them back as doubled, and I kind of grabbed that idea of like reflection from some animes and some different magic things and the different sources of like how can he gain a benefit from countering, and kind of going into that like joke of Blue cheating at magic and cheating in all of these spells and getting free mana for countering you. I thought it was going to be really fun, and it ended up being a huge success with my players. They absolutely loved this monster, and I think that despite how hard it was to turn this into a D&D monster, it was by far the most rewarding one that I made. If you've made it this far into the video, I really do appreciate it. If you could please leave a like and subscribe. This channel is something that is pretty new, and I love making this content for people, so if you can just subscribe and help support the channel. We also have a podcast where we talk about stories and other ideas to help inspire new and old DMs alike. So if you're interested in any of that, check out the links down below, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.